Welcome back to our polarity series. This is lesson 7, the shadow feminine. We are going to talk about the feminine shadow. And we are going to start by defining shadow and then going over the life cycle of a shadow, the shadow's story arc. And then we'll end by just giving a couple of feminine examples. So let's begin. The shadow is a substantial part of ourselves that is outside of the light of our awareness. So it is in the shadow. It is still there, still part of who we are, still operating, still influencing us. We are simply unaware of it. That's in essence what a shadow is. Now let's talk about the life cycle of a shadow. It begins with its creation. For the most part, not always, but for the most part, a shadow is created because some part of ourselves is either neglected or repressed away, traumatized away, conditioned away into the shadow. That's essentially it. Now, from its creation, from there, the next stage is our system, our psyche will attempt to create wholeness, restoration, reintegration again of that shadow. That shadow needs to be brought up into the light once again in order to be restored, to be reintegrated. However, the shadow, our psyche cannot do that for us. We are the ones bringing the light of awareness into the shadow. That's the healing process. So what the psyche will do instead is it will activate this self-correcting mechanism it has of inflating or collapsing, over or under expressing that specific trait of ours, of ourselves that is in the shadow. And by over or under expressing that specific trait, this unhealthy expression of that trait will cause problems in how we think, how we feel, and it will leave breadcrumbs in our lives. Uncomfortable, not tasty breadcrumbs in our life. That could be the way that you feel. It could be depression, it could be symptoms, physical symptoms. It could be your behavior, relationships. Basically the over or under expression, the unhealthy expression of that trait of ourselves that is in the shadow will cause problems. And hopefully you will notice that, notice the pattern, notice something is off, and from there you will now begin the restoration process, the reintegration process of looking inwards and going about bringing the shadow into the light once again. So that's the whole shadow life cycle, from its creation, usually due to some kind of trauma, to the psyche activating its self-correcting mechanism of either inflating or collapsing that trait of ourselves that is in the shadow, that in it causing problems in our lives, us recognizing the pattern, and then beginning the reintegration process of that shadow into the light once again. So full circle. Now let's zoom in on a couple of feminine examples, like I said in the beginning, just to end this lesson. So a relevant example in our society would be, on an individual level, the collapsed receptivity of the feminine. let's go back just one step to restate what we already talked about in previous lessons, which is the essence of the feminine pole, the feminine principle. On a metaphysical layer, its core essence is energy and movement. Its counterpart, the masculine, being emptiness, awareness, stillness. The feminine is content, movement, energy. Now, if we go down or up, however you want to see it, one layer from the metaphysical into the functional, more operational layer, this feminine essence will play around in 4 different ways, the 4 pillars of the feminine, which are receptivity, expression, flow, and radiance. Receptivity, being open to receive something, expressing that energy, and then flow, being expression, finding a rhythm, you could say, and its final outcome, radiance. These are the 4 pillars of the feminine pole, and you will notice they are all dynamic in nature. And that is because in its purest form, the feminine is a dynamic pole. It is movement, energy. Now, all of these traits of the feminine can be, if they are repressed away into the shadow, they will have an unhealthy expression. They will be either over or under expressed. And when it comes to the feminine specifically, as opposed to the masculine, that over or under expression means basically a flooding or freezing, because the feminine pole is essentially movement. So an overexpression of the feminine will be flooding, and underexpression of the feminine will be freezing, because it has to do with dynamic, with movement. So let's go back into our example. On an individual level, very common, it's the collapsed receptivity. Receptivity being the first trait of the feminine. Collapsed meaning an underexpression of that trait, an unhealthy expression of that feminine trait, receptivity. That is very common. That usually happens because of some kind of trauma related to being open, to being vulnerable. Although again, not always. Like I said in the beginning, the creation of a shadow is not always due to some kind of trauma. It could be for its counterpart, the masculine, being absent and not providing the containment, the environment for safe expression. But and that is very common as well. But more common is some kind of trauma, some kind of unsafety or guilt or shame of being open, of being receptive, of being vulnerable to being receptive. That leads to trauma, that leads into that receptivity now being collapsed or inflated. In this real example, we're going to with a collapsed, because it's the more common that we see. And how that manifests in our society, it's the common not needing help, not accepting help, not working together, not being receptive to working together, being isolated, insular, independent, disconnected. That is a collapsed, a underexpression of the primary pillar of the feminine, which is receptivity. Now let's go into another example on the collective level, also very common, very relevant to our days, and that would be the inflation now, not the collapsed, but the inflation of radiance. Radiance being the culmination, the last pillar of the feminine, receptivity, expression, flow, radiance. In an unhealthy expression of it, when it is inflated, when it is overexpressed, radiance is no longer serving anything, is no longer serving life, which is always a consequence of the feminine and the masculine pole working together. When it's disconnected from awareness, the masculine pole, and expresses in this unhealthy manner, in this case an inflation expression of the radiance trait, that is the radiance being magnetic for its own sake. That is the attention economy, the influencer economy, the beauty attention seeking. And mind you, remember always, when we are talking about masculine and feminine, we are not talking about men and women here. Although they are related, male and female, they come from each pole. But as humans, we are not only masculine or feminine, okay? Yes, it will be more prevalent generally speaking, on one or the other, but always remember that we are talking about poles in consciousness here, okay? So this beauty or influencer attention economy is very prevalent in females, but also in males, obviously. And that is a complete inflation of radiance, of this prime feminine pillar. It's an unhealthy expression. So that is it, the individual and the collective example. And of course, their restoration process involves always awareness, involves always bringing the light of awareness into the shadow, or rather, the shadow into the light once again. On an individual level. On a collective level, we cannot talk about psychology there, because that's a systemic thing, that's a combination of all the individuals. But that's the restoration, the reintegration process is the light of awareness. So that's it. Cool lesson. We talked about the feminine, the shadow, its life cycle, and a couple of few examples. And we also zoomed in on the pillars. So a very comprehensive lesson. I hope you liked it, and we'll have more for the next lesson. Be well.